I was the elected Attorney General, as I've mentioned, of California. Before that, I was a courtroom prosecutor. In those roles, I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women. Fraudsters who ripped off consumers. Cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
Presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris is now leaning into her history as a prosecutor and district attorney to essentially frame herself as a cop who's going to stop convicted felon Donald Trump. But her history shows that she's an easy target for both sides of the political aisle because she's been everything to everyone depending on what is popular at any given moment. She went from being kind of tough on crime to being much softer on crime. And since she doesn't really have like a guiding principle on this issue, again, both sides get to pick and choose which parts of her past to attack her on. So look, Harris has written 2 books about her time as a prosecutor and attorney general. So she published Smart on Crime, a career prosecutor's plan to make us safer. And that was near the end of her tenure as a district attorney in 2009. Harris described herself as a prosecutor who was tough on crime by being smart on crime. Said she promoted programs to fix recidivism and made improving my office's felony conviction rates my #1 priority. But she then changed her ideology. After the fatal police shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, that happened in 2014, of course, Harris embraced calls for criminal justice reform. In her 2019 memoir, The Truths We Hold: An American Journey, Harris described herself as a progressive prosecutor, writing, quote, I knew I was there for the victims, both the victims of crimes committed and the victims of a broken criminal justice system. For me, to be a progressive prosecutor is to understand and act on this dichotomy. So, as a result of this, you have Donald Trump, for instance, attacking Kamala Harris's record as a prosecutor and essentially saying that she is too soft on crime. In fact, I've seen a lot of conservatives make a similar argument. Trump and his allies are trying to emphasize the progressive part of her identity. And on Tuesday, Trump attacked Harris as a radical left person and blamed current crime in the city in cities on her tenure as a district attorney, saying, quote, really what you should do is take a look at San Francisco now compared to before she became the district attorney, and you'll see what she'll do to our country. And I have to be honest, he's not entirely wrong. So I'm gonna get into what I mean by that with specific examples in just a moment.
Hey, don't scroll away. Come back. Because before the video continues, we just want to urge you to lend your support to TYT. You power our honest reporting. You do it at tyt.com/team, and we love you for it.
But Cenk, what are your thoughts?
I think he's pretty wrong. So there's 2 ways that you can look at Kamala Harris's record. I'm gonna get to that in a sec. But on Trump's comment, she left in 2017. So now we're blaming everything from 2013 to now on Kamala Harris.
She championed Prop 47, which
she kind of championed, not really. I mean, maybe you know something I don't know, but I don't believe she was on the record on Prop 47. And so look, I think blaming all of San Francisco today on Kamala Harris is definitely a bridge too far, in my opinion.
That I agree with. That I definitely agree with.
Okay.
But to say that she had nothing to do with loosening some of the laws.
I'm not saying nothing.
Well.
I'm not saying nothing. We're gonna get to that record. But as Anna's presenting that record to you guys, look, my thought on it is, you could look at it as oh, she's a politician trying to have it both ways. And depending on which way the wind is blowing, she's going in that direction.
Yep.
You could also look at it as, well, it's kind of a savvy person and forget the politics of it, not extreme on either side. So she wants to be tough on crime, but she doesn't want to put away people who are not, serious criminals and who actually can be reformed. And you can think that's a pretty reasonable, moderate position. So, and by the way, both of those things can be true. Okay, so let's hear out the record and then discuss.
Okay, so before I get to California specifically, I think it's important for people to understand what exactly conservatives are using to attack her, what Trump supporters are using to attack her. So she did help raise money for something known as the Minnesota Freedom Fund, which provided bail for those suspected of committing violent crimes. And so here's the tweet that they're pointing to. This dates back to June 1st of 2020. She provided a link for the fund and said, if you're able to chip in now to the Minnesota Freedom Fund to help post bail for those protesting on the ground in Minnesota. So look, she might have been unaware of how that money was going to be used. Sometimes there's a bait and switch with these types of efforts. She probably thought, look, there's all sorts of innocent protesters who are getting swept up and arrested as a result of the rioters exploiting the protests and causing all this damage. And so there should be a bail fund so they can at least be able to get bailed out before their trial date. But the right is currently attacking her for this because, let's go to this excerpt from an ABC News article. Sean Michael Tillman, a repeat felon, shot and killed a passenger on a light rail platform in St. Paul, Minnesota in May after reportedly being released from bail on April 29th for indecent exposure, thanks to the Minnesota Freedom Fund. So they're pointing to that as a way of attacking her. And I do think that kind of attack is probably going to be somewhat effective, especially in areas of the country where we've seen certain people get out with no cash bail again and again and again, only to commit all sorts of violent crimes. Yeah, so again, she's got both sides. And so I didn't see anything in there, and we might debate this, that where I thought, wow, she's really supporting like radical left or defund the police. So in that case, she's supporting getting protesters out on bail. That was what her intent was. Okay, that's not that bad. That sounds pretty good. Yeah. Okay. I mean, it does seem pretty good. Just like voting in favor of Prop 47 in California sounded pretty good. But then it turned out that they reclassified all sorts of violent crimes, including child sex trafficking, domestic violence like strangulation, from felonies to misdemeanors. So, okay, real quick on Prop 47. So if you don't live in California, there's no reason for you to know it. But we voted on a ballot measure, and to be fair, this was us, the people of California that voted on it. Although the ballot measures are often very confusing, this is a perfect example of it. And we said that we would move some felonies to misdemeanors. But I went back and looked at the text of Prop 47, and it doesn't say any of the crimes. No, it doesn't. So then, like, how could you put up a ballot measure and say we're gonna move some felonies to misdemeanors and not tell us which felonies? And so then when they did this thing where, it made it seem like it was like no big deal felonies, like nonviolent drug possession. Nonviolent drug possession. Okay, I probably voted for it, to be honest. I voted for it. I remember voting for it because I thought that it was common sense criminal justice reform. And it was a total bait and switch. And I'm supposed to pretend like it was a great proposition that I should be proud of voting in favor of. But no, it was a bait and switch. I want people who are trafficking children, for disgusting, sexual abuse to be in prison. That's where they belong. They belong in prison if they're trafficking children. So, due to strangling his wife, he should be in prison. Yeah, it's just outrageous how vague that ballot measure was. Okay, now Anna, what I saw in Kamala Harris was that she was, as usual with Kamala Harris, didn't make a comment on Prop 47. So anyone who likes Prop 47 or hates Prop 47 can then put in their desires into that empty vessel. I don't mean Kamala Harris overall. I mean that particular position was an empty vessel. Am I seeing it wrong or no? Well, let me give you more, because there's more. Again, her record is super mixed, and it depends on what's hot at the moment. So when tough on crime was hot, she went with tough on crime. When soft on crime was hot, she went with soft on crime. So here's another example of that. As Attorney General of California, she pushed for prison reform, which is good because the prisons were awful, right? I thought prison reform meant, hey, the conditions are disgusting and inhumane and we must improve the conditions. No, in California, they went in an opposite direction. Why don't we actually save the state some money, shut the prisons down entirely, and just release people? De-incarceration, that was the policy that she actually pushed for. And so what was the result of that? Well, let's get to those details. As of last week, prison officials reported there was 92,480 people locked up in California's prison systems, down from a height of more than 156,000 inmates during the early 2010s before the law was passed. So this was one of the laws that she championed, okay? Now, California's reforms created all sorts of problems, including, well, a giant spike in crime. So the California State Attorney General's office reported that from 2014 to 2023, violent crime had risen by more than 30%, including jumps in rapes, aggravated assaults, and murders. I know some of the leftists out there think that when I talk about a spike in crime, I'm just talking about shoplifting. No, I'm talking about rape, I'm talking about murder, I'm talking about things that terrorize communities, especially marginalized communities that you purport to care about but don't care about at all. So that's the kind of stuff they're gonna attack her on. That's the reality. But what's amazing is you go to the left and they're attacking her for being a cop and for being too tough on crime.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, that's the nature of a politician who's trying to be, depending on your framing, moderate or wishy-washy, right? So for example, she actually did hold some police departments in California accountable on training, which I love. I think that was the #1 issue. I've talked a lot about that. They're too quick to shoot. They get taught that disrespecting a police officer is like the biggest crime in America, etc. And she held some of those departments accountable. That's great. On the other hand, when a cop committed a crime, she almost never prosecuted them. And so like activists, and I don't mean like far left activists, they're just people who care about police reform.
I'm
good
critical
people.
of that. I'm critical of that.
Yeah.
If a cop actually carries out abuse and is terrorizing the community that he's supposed to be serving, he should be prosecuted. She should be prosecuted. So,
right, and she wouldn't.
Yeah.
So an incredibly mixed bag here.
Yeah, so here's the other thing that in general, the left has been kind of critical of her in the past. But I actually think this is a good thing because it shows that she was an effective prosecutor. So felony conviction rates rose under Harris when she was a district attorney from 52% to 71%, and gun crime convictions rose to 92%, meaning she didn't just prosecute and fail to convict, she would prosecute and she would convict. And that was in the first 5 years that she was in office, according to her book. We are sending 3 times as many offenders to state prison as we were in 2001, 3 years before I took office, Harris wrote. She also increased convictions for drug sellers from 56% in 2003 to 74% in 2008, Harris noted. So I've got no love for the drug traffickers, but for people who are struggling with addiction, people who are caught with possession, I do not want them to be thrown in prison. I do want the system to actually have a program in place to help them, and California actually used to have that. They were called drug courts. And essentially, if someone was addicted to drugs and were committing crimes as a result of that addiction, the courts would give them an option. Either you go to jail or you go to rehabilitation, you get clean. And most people would choose the second option. That's the obvious option. And it would help them, a lot of people, get past their addiction. That was a much better model.
Well, this is the best argument for Kamala Harris on this issue, if you ask me. And I am actually moved by it a little bit, which is she says, and she delivered, and you can see it in the stat, I prosecuted and convicted a record number of serious felons.
Exactly.
But if you were a low-level offender that was just, did some recreational drug use, etc., I put those people into more of a rehab track.
Exactly.
But that's exactly what I would want a prosecutor to do. I don't want you to be too tough on low-level offenders that you could actually rehabilitate and get on a better track. And I don't want you to be too soft on really serious criminals. So you can argue that's what a great majority of citizens want. So you could say, hey, that's a pretty good record.
Yeah, and look, I'm not saying she was perfect as a prosecutor. There are certainly areas that I can be critical of, including the unwillingness to prosecute cops who abuse their power. But there's this myth going around about how she was like really throwing the book at people who were caught with possession, but that's actually not true. She championed a program at that time that offered low-level drug dealers, low-level drug dealers, right? So random person on the corner selling whatever. Instead of throwing that person in prison, offered them an opportunity to receive a high school diploma, job training, and access to available work instead of prison sentences. I can get behind that. I like that. That's smart.
Yeah. So look, as I read the whole record, Anna, and reread a lot of it because we'd covered some of it before, I walked away thinking, is she a politician that will take a convenient position to be painted as a moderate? Yes. But was she actually moderate on this issue? And did she, execute her office, the responsibilities of her office in a way that a majority of citizens in California and in the country would agree with, and I would agree with? Yeah, I also think that's true. So if every politician moderated, maybe on just to get votes, but did the right thing, I would take that. So when I look at Kamala Harris's record now, in retrospect, at least on this issue, and I've criticized her in the past for this, and I did in 2020, but given what's happened over the last 4 years, I would now say I like Kamala Harris's positions on this and her track record overall. And so, and I can see how you would disagree depending on where you're on the political spectrum. If you're far left and thought she should have let out all 150,000 persons, I don't know. I know I'm straw manning, right?
Not by much.
Okay, then you don't like her, and then you'll think she's a cop, right? If you think, I don't even want low-level offenders, getting away with it. I want the book thrown at every person who's ever looked at a cop. Then you're gonna think she's too liberal. But I think a lot of people are gonna like this record.
Yeah, I think her record as district attorney was actually, for the most part, there were definitely some flaws, but for the most part, pretty good. And I hope she taps into that rather than pandering to those who think that there shouldn't be any law and order.
Right, but if she did it just for political reasons, I don't really care, because all I care about is it the right policy or is it not?
Agreed.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.